Topic 01 Geography. Insularity. The noun insularity refers to the quality of being isolated or detached. In fact, the word is based on the Latin word insula, for island. The phrase "no man is an island" means that no one can be completely separate from others. Example, one of the distinguishing characteristics of the Trump administration centers on the insularity of its outlook. Peninsula. Part of Italy is a peninsula, and it's a pretty famous one, because it looks like a boot. A peninsula juts into the water but has at least a narrow connection to land. If the boot broke off from Italy just below the knee, it would be an island. Example, the United States and China, they argue, should abandon the idea of denuclearizing the Korean peninsula and turn to old-fashioned deterrence. Marine. If it has to do with the ocean or sea, you can call it marine. Your friend in U.S. Armed Services who is a Marine probably spends a lot of time near the ocean. Example, marine plants and animals such as seaweed and whales. Maritime. Use maritime to describe anything involving the sea and ships. A maritime museum would probably be located in a coastal town, and stuffed full of historic boats, oars, life preservers, and fishing gear. Example, maritime cultures. Moist. Moist things feel damp when you touch them, they're just a little bit wet. You might want to bring a blanket to sit on for a picnic, especially if it rained yesterday and the grass is still moist. Example, eyes moist with tears. Oasis. As you walk through the desert of life, may you always find your oasis, a place where you can find safety and sustenance. Example, he opened the interview on that, and they bonded over the shambolic genius of oasis. Tide. The tide is the daily rise and fall of the sea level. You can count on the regular changing patterns of the tide, unless of course a tsunami is headed your way. Example, a rising tide of popular interest. Ebb. When something ebbs, it is declining, falling, or flowing away. The best time to look for sea creatures in tidal pools is when the tide is on the ebb, meaning it has receded from the shore. Example, the tides ebbed at noon. Continent. A continent is one of the 7 largest landmasses found on Earth. Asia, Australia, and Africa are 3 continents. Can you name the other 4? Terrestrial. Not straying far from its Latin root terra meaning earth, terrestrial means of the earth. If it's terrestrial, you'll find it on Earth. If it's extraterrestrial, you'll find it emerging from a UFO. Example, he developed an immense terrestrial practicality. Outskirt. Some people like to live downtown. Others prefer the open spaces of the suburbs. But if you live in between the two, you are in the outskirts, the place where the city ends and the suburbs begin. Example, they lived on the outskirts of Houston. Endemic. If you want to underscore just how commonly found and present something is within a particular place, try the word endemic. Tight pants are endemic in my lunchroom. Example, many of the diversity issues at Uber are also endemic to Silicon Valley. Cosmopolitan. Your Aunt Eleanor, who's lived in 6 different countries and speaks 4 languages fluently, might be described as cosmopolitan, or comfortable and familiar with different cultures and people. Example, the ancient and cosmopolitan societies of Syria and Egypt. Subterranean. Subterranean is an adjective that describes something just below what can be seen, like the subterranean jealousy you hide under a smile and kind words for the actor who got the part you wanted. Example, subterranean motives for murder. Cavern. If something reminds you of a cave or cavern in size, shape, or feel, you can describe it with the adjective cavernous. Your cavernous basement is huge, damp, and dark, but fortunately there are no bats down there. Flaw. A flaw can be a sign of weakness or defect. If you try to make wings and fly off the roof but wind up crashing in the gutter, there's a flaw in your plan. Example, he had his flaws, but he was great nonetheless. Crevice. A crevice is a long, tight space often found on the face of a mountain or other geological formation. A crevice can be large or small, but because it is usually hard reach, it is a great hiding place for all things like reptiles, bugs, and lost climbers. Example: workers transported a green pumper truck to inject concrete inside eroded hillside crevices. Equator. An equator is a circle that divides the surface of an object into two equal halves. If you're freezing up there in Iceland, get yourself on down closer to the Earth's equator, where it's nice and warm. Example: more information will also help scientists to monitor whether some diseases become less common near the equator as their reach expands toward the poles. Longitude. In geography, longitude refers to the imaginary lines that bisect the globe through the North and South poles, the ones that run vertically, as opposed to the lines of latitude that run horizontally, parallel to the equator. Example: this data set includes the latitude and longitude of each shooting incident. Altitude. The noun altitude refers to how high something rises. The high altitude of the Himalayan mountain range slowed the progress of the hikers. Latitude. Use the word latitude to describe how much freedom you have in making choices. For example, if a teacher gives you latitude in writing your paper, you might get to choose the topic and how many sources to include. Example: allowed his children considerable latitude in how they spent their money. Meridian. The word meridian describes a gigantic imaginary circle that runs north and south on the Earth's surface, from the North Pole to the South Pole. If you stood on the meridian at the North Pole, you would be at the Earth's northernmost point. Example: all points on the same meridian have the same longitude. Antarctic. An extremely cold continent at the South Pole, almost entirely below the Antarctic Circle, covered by an ice cap up to 13,000 feet deep. Arctic. If the weatherman warns of Arctic conditions, get out your thermal underwear, hats, and gloves. It's going to be cold. The word Arctic describes frigid and inhospitable weather. Example: an Arctic climate.